And now it's time for examining silly propaganda with Marmaduke, the part of the show where Marmaduke comes out and examines some silly propaganda.
Why she doesn't give a fork about your insurrection
is a profanity-laced 2009 anti-copyright piece of handmade propaganda from New York City. It expresses absolute outrage over attempts at radical revolution tearing down the current system to make way for a new world that forget about how, when you attempt a radical revolution tearing down the current system to make way for the new world, you're not supposed to forget about feminism. Quote, "We are not living in an isolated instance of resistance. If history can't teach us anything else, we should at least realize that our main goals must include all forms of liberation." Pretty much, if you are a member of Antifa who is heroically beating up innocent people and is excited at the idea of getting to fight cops, this zine is meant to check your privilege. You're supposed to remember the importance of feminism while engaging in the noble public service of bringing about the Marxist revolution. In particular, the writers of this zine were very annoyed by the popularity of the revolutionary French books The Call and The Coming Insurrection because they do not put sufficient emphasis on the way patriarchy harms women in everyday life. After a stream of expletives, the author, whom we shall refer to as Zizim Zur, announced Zizim Zur's intentions. Let's talk about rectifying the pseudo-divide between insurrectionist anarchism and identity politics, reuniting barricades and unshaven legs, bonding, riot, and girl. I didn't make that up. That's how Zizim Zur spelled it out. Bonding, riot, and girl. The author's arguments are illustrated with quotes, which I take to be either real-life examples of the author being triggered, or at least fictionalized accounts with some basis in reality. See if you can spot the logical fallacy in this little exchange. Speaking to a comrade, a vintage 2009 NPC runs this dialogue script. "I heard you said that feminism distracts from the totality." "No, I said that you must view feminism in regards to its historical context."
"I don't give a fork about historical context. I give a fork about the ways in which patriarchy manifests itself now. Talking about sheets like Hegel won't solve the fact that people are getting sexually assaulted here and now."
Now, if we're going to correct the sexist behavior of revolutionaries who advance patriarchy by saying feminism ought to be viewed in its historical context, we will obviously need some solid citations, right? Well, looky here, male feminist pigs, we got a footnote to illustrate how the totality allows for the biopolitical manipulation and exploitation of the female body. See footnote 3. Oh boy, footnote 3. See the poetic What is the Totality by Kevin Tucker. A poem. Boy, I can already feel a male feminist Antifa member's privilege getting wrecked from all the way back in 2009. It becomes clear when you read this feminist anarchist zine that the author has someone in mind from the radical New York scene. Some Occupy Wall Street dude clearly occupied some time with anarchist babes in a way which the author finds particularly problematic, but we are denied the juicy details. In light of the evils of alleged male anarchist rapists, the author proposes using violence to defend safe spaces so that women can temporarily feel liberated from patriarchy and rape culture while engaging in revolutionary activities. The author, who we're calling Zizim Zur, finds the anonymous movement, or the invisible committee within radical politics, to be obnoxious. Zizim Zur doesn't want to be anonymous. Zizim Zur wants B-Bimber's personal rage to be a vital element of Zizim Zur's resistance. Quote, "When you hear about striking workers, you don't demand proof of the boss's wrongs. You instead ask how to best support the workers. Why the fork wouldn't it occur to you to ask the same question when you hear that a dude's been called out for abuse and assault?" The presumption of innocence does not exist. even for men who are radical revolutionaries. When a man is accused of abusing or assaulting women, the accusation should be presumed true, just as accusations against the evils of capitalist bosses are presumed true. For vivim ver, it is important that radical feminists have a respected role and voice within the anarchist movement against capitalism. Quote,
and the feminists demanding equal pay for their wage slavery, as much our enemies as yours.
Translation: saying you are a feminist does not protect you from accusations of being complicit with bourgeois capitalism. Liberals get the bullet too. The little quotes from these pre-2009 NPCs continue. The patriarchal NPC wonders why they've been so alienating to NPC women and POC NPCs while discussing radical anarchist strategies over beers. The woke radical feminist NPC unleashes a volley of F-bombs to remind the patriarchal NPC that the reason women and POCs don't join the revolution is that the male-privileged NPCs keep using their anarchist beer-drinking strategy sessions to try and get laid. Zizimzer argues that when radical anarchist white boys try to sleep with radical anarchist girls and POCs, this is a manifestation of patriarchy and a repetition of their privileged white boy attitude that they should have learned to get past already. Zizimzer goes on to explain that the socialization of men creates these problems of white male privileged attitudes. Quote,
it's not your GD penis, it's the idea that boys don't cry.
This leads radical men to think of radical tools of resistance as passive objects rather than active subjects. If you are wondering how something impersonal, like a strategy, a tool, or an action, could be made personal, be made an active subject, when things like strategies and tools are not people and don't have human emotions, your guess is as good as mine for what this is all about. Here's an example of some patriarchal, anti-feminist behavior on the part of New York anarchist revolutionaries. The Thing. In the spirit of March Madness, New York Forking City announces a competitive occupation tournament. Abstinence from this competition would be intense and counter-revolutionary. Don't be a baby. So, by telling people not to be a baby, by failing to show up to an occupation, these revolutionaries were in fact engaging in toxically male competitiveness. You should be free to decide when and where you engage in revolution without the patriarchal pressure to not be a baby being levied against you. Quote,
but fork coddling.
So, not only must we not call women and POC revolutionaries babies if they don't participate in the revolution, we must also be careful not to coddle revolutionaries either. Well, do tell. Quote,
throwing newspaper boxes in the street feels good, fine, but if it's a bunch of rich white dudes doing it, then it's as liberal as having a non-stop meeting during an occupation.
So, to be clear, it's not fork coddling of women and POC. It's fork coddling of rich white dudes who engage in revolutionary activities which the author finds insufficient for creating actual, material, tangible change in the world. Breaking stuff won't be enough to advance the revolution, but banning the Antifa dude for life after he has been accused of beating his Antifa girlfriend certainly will be a step in the right direction. After restating Zizimzer's objection to the idea that radicals should embrace anonymity, the author writes,
the personal is political for sure, but is the political ever personal?
Encouraging anonymity results in erasing the identity politics women and POC need to feel motivated to show up to the anti-capitalist riot. Embracing anonymity is a form of internalized bigotry. Furthermore, anonymity makes it harder to hold privileged white boys accountable when they do naughty things. For the anarchist revolution against all current systems and organizations to succeed, some form of system or organization is needed to properly punish revolutionaries who deserve to be kicked out of the revolution for their patriarchal behavior.
Women in the scene can never become anonymous as long as men in the scene continue to treat them as sex objects or force them to think about sexual violence at what are supposed to be sites of liberation. We need it to be the exception, not the rule, that the woman leaves the scene when a hetero couple breaks up. We need people not to dismiss feminism as liberal bullshit or an excuse to attack dudes. We need folks to make accountability a priority. We need community.
Well, I must admit to the author, it sounds like this revolution was a terribly painful experience for anyone to endure. I sure hope you guys figured out a system of organization and justice that helped you overcome these problems. Too bad you couldn't use the Western one. I've heard it works great. The author closes with some personal notes acknowledging Zimzer's extreme position of privilege. I'm just guessing, but I think we might have a white Wee Whim Wur here writing this piece. Explaining why Zimzer didn't discuss LGBT issues more, the author writes, quote,
I beg the reader's leniency in recognizing that the reasons for this were for succinctness rather than invalidation.
Pretty much the author erased LGBT people from this propaganda piece and would like them to be understanding of that. Leniency, huh?
Mercy is for the weak. We do not train to be merciful here. A man face you, he is enemy. Enemy deserve no mercy.
Second, Zimzer has a note for historians. Oh boy, I think that's referring to me and all you guys. We're getting some insight from a primary source into the real history of the People's Revolution of 2009. Quote,
the gist of the conversations quoted herein did in fact occur. However, historians take note. Each conversation occurred over beers or booze, some more than others, and thus my recollections might be a little further from the truth than otherwise.
Sounds like Zimzer might have had more than a little alcohol at these strategy sessions. Gee, maybe in light of this information, I should reread this little historical gem with a little bit more historical accuracy in the reenactment.
I already said that feminism distracts from the totality.
No, I said that you must view feminism in regards to its historical context.
I don't give a about historical context. I give a about the ways in which patriarchy manifests itself now. Talking about things like Hegel won't solve the fact that people are getting sexually assaulted here and now.
Well, fellow historians, if you would like out to reach the primary source to learn more about the history of revolutionary action in 2009 New York, well, Zimzer's email is beat@riseup.net. Let's chat, Zimzer writes. Well, you know what? I think I'll send a little old link to this vid to this email just to see if the revolution against patriarchy is still going strong for our author. With that, I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. And I'll catch you later.
No, Bubbles, have mercy.
Mercy!